Hello and welcome back. I am Heather, your host here at Felony Spectator, and today's episode is a hard one. It's really distressing because it involves a child. And for me, any cases that involve kids is always really difficult. I'm going to talk about it anyway because I think we all need to recognize the signs of abuse in children and be diligent in reporting. Okay, let's begin. This story is about Angela McAnulty. She was convicted of the murder and torture of her teenage daughter, Jeanette Maples. Angela McAnulty was born October 2nd, 1968 in California. When Angela was just 5 years old, her own mother, Nancy Fusy, was murdered. Nancy was only 22 at the time of her murder. Nancy, Angela, and her brothers were all living in a hotel room in Sacramento, California, after her mom separated from her father for abuse and cheating on Nancy. Nancy had enough, so she took the kids and went to a hotel. Nancy would go out one night dancing with her friends, and she did not return home. Nancy would be discovered by a fisherman half naked in Sutter County with 29 stab wounds to her stomach, chest, and arms. There were apparently shoe prints and tire tracks nearby where the body was found, but unfortunately her murder would go unsolved. Some would suspect that she was killed by the Zodiac killer, and there are other sources that sort of lump her in with the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, but police thought it was more likely Angela's own father, Nancy's husband, who she had recently left. Angela's father remained the prime suspect, but the case eventually went cold. Angela and her brothers stayed in foster care for a short period of time before their father brought them home to live with him. Sadly, living with him and his temper were very difficult for Angela and the brothers. Her father was very abusive. He withheld food from the kids as a form of punishment. He hit the boys with tools and beat them if they ever took food without asking permission first. Nothing got better for the kids, but they'd eventually grow up and move out away from their abusive father. The two brothers were strong enough to break the cycle of abuse and do their best to live their lives better. But all the anger and abusive behavior the kids were exposed to sadly was passed down to Angela. And this is very common. People who grow up in abusive homes unknowingly seek out the same chaotic lifestyles that they grew up in. And this could be that they become abusers themselves, or they end up marrying or dating an abusive partner. The cycle is very hard to break. Angela was only 15 when she left home. She would meet a carnival worker and decided to take off. Not much is said about her carnival days, but she would eventually become involved in a lifestyle of drugs. Angela would eventually go on to meet Anthony Maples, and they would have 3 children together, 2 boys and a daughter they named Jeanette. Angela also had another daughter named Patience with another man, and Patience lived with them as well. Angela and Anthony Maples were arrested and spent some time in jail. It's a little unclear why, but some would say it was because of neglect and abuse, but I also read it was drugs. I actually suspect, though, it was probably both. Her future husband, Richard, would claim that she lost custody of her kids during this time for torturing them, burning them, beating them, and locking them in closets. When Angela and Anthony were arrested, the kids were placed into foster care. But Angela was released from prison. She regained custody of the girls, Jeanette and Patience. Anthony moved away and started a whole new life without her. Now, people who knew Angela said that she was very high-strung, controlling, and angry. She didn't often have steady income, and when she did work, she made very little money. She also isolated her children from others. She didn't bring them around, and she kept them at home away from people, including friends and family. In 2002, Angela would meet Richard McAnulty. The two of them would get married and they'd have a son of their own. They decided to move away to Oregon with the girls, leaving the boys behind. But the boys actually preferred their foster parents because they really just wanted to get away from all the abuse. Jeanette, the oldest daughter, would get the worst of the abuse, but she stayed with her mom anyway. Jeanette was described as a good kid. When she attended public school, she studied really hard, was given a perfect attendance award in 7th and 8th grade, but socially, Jeanette was an outcast. She would come to school in dirty and torn clothing, and she had really low self-esteem, so she was quite shy. Sadly, she was often teased by her classmates, and the few friends that she did have, she was only allowed to see them in school. Angela wasn't allowed to invite her friends over, and Jeanette also wasn't allowed to go to her friends' homes either. In 2008, during gym class, people noticed that Jeanette was very bruised. She admitted to her friends and her gym teacher that her mother would beat her and also wouldn't allow Jeanette to eat, which explained why she was so skinny. Her friends were worried, so they told their parents and CPS was called. Jeanette also confided in a teacher who reportedly abused to CPS as well, so CPS went to the home. Angela denied everything and said Jeanette was a compulsive liar, so CPS left and closed the case. After the visit from CPS, Angela decided to pull Jeanette out of school and told everyone that she was going to homeschool her daughter instead. After that, nobody really saw Jeanette except for a few family members. In 2009, CPS did get another anonymous call saying that Jeanette was grossly underweight, was seen with a split lip, and the anonymous caller thought that Jeanette was being abused. This caller would turn out to be Jeanette's grandmother, Richard's mom. Jeanette's grandmother reportedly called CPS several times, but the agency never followed up on these calls. It's not said why. I couldn't find any information on that, but CPS didn't take these calls seriously. So perhaps it was because they were anonymous, but it's very unclear. Sadly, the last call would be only days before Jeanette's death. That brings us to December 9th, 2009. Around 8 p.m. that evening, Angela made a frantic phone call to 911 reporting that Jeanette had fallen down and stopped breathing. When paramedics arrived, Angela begged them to save her baby and seemed very distraught to everyone. Paramedics found Jeanette, who was 15 at the time, in the living room with wet hair, no top, and no pulse. Angela would go on to say that Jeanette was fine an hour ago, but she had just fallen down and stopped breathing. So paramedics would see that Jeanette had multiple bruises on her face, cuts above her eyes, scarring on her lips, and she was extremely emaciated. Paramedics also questioned Angela on Jeanette's age several times due to how small and skinny she was. She definitely didn't look like she was 15 and probably closer to 9 or 10. And while the paramedics were attending to Jeanette, Angela seemed to be in a manic state. She would go from hysterical to quiet and even laughed a couple of times. She was just very excitable. The paramedics found this quite odd. We do know everyone responds differently in a traumatic event, but she just seemed extra strange. It was also noted that Richard didn't say a word the entire time. He simply just sat on the couch and watched. Sadly, Jeanette would be pronounced dead at 8:42 after being transferred to the hospital, but she had actually died in the living room as paramedics were unable to help her. At the hospital, Dr. Elizabeth Hilton would be the one to examine Jeanette's body. She would find that Jeanette's face was quite disfigured from severe bruises, deep scars, and there would also be wounds all over her arms, legs, and back. Her femur bone was actually exposed out of her skin, and her teeth were broken, and her lips apparently were just pulverized. Jeanette was severely dehydrated, starved, and the doctor knew that Jeanette did not die from the result of a simple fall that Angela claimed had happened. Angela and Richard would be arrested, and there was an investigation immediately as to what really happened to Jeanette. So there was lots of evidence in the home when police went in to investigate. The walls of Jeanette's bedroom were covered in blood splatter, in which Angela actually tried to clean before calling 911, and her blood would also be found on various walls all over the house. And Richard would admit that Angela actually said she wanted to bury Jeanette to get rid of her body, but it was him that insisted that it was best to call 911. And he was the one to make the call while Angela was running around trying to hide evidence and clean up blood. Patience, Angela's other daughter, also told police that they were starved and Angela repeatedly beated on Jeanette. She would go on to say that Richard and Angela would use shoes or their hands to hit Jeanette across the mouth. And it was later found out that Angela would turn on the vacuum to hide the sounds of beatings that took place in Jeanette's room. She would beat her with leather belts, sticks, and torture her with pliers. And the police tested various objects around the home that would either show blood or pieces of Jeanette's dried flesh. When the kids were denied food or water for days at a time, Jeanette would use the toilet or dog bowl to get water. Now, this next part is pretty awful, so if you're squeamish, I am sorry. You might want to jump ahead a little bit. When Jeanette's injuries became infected, Angela would just cut the infection off with a knife, which is why Jeanette's hip bone was exposed. They literally cut her open. And she slept on cardboard, often handcuffed so she couldn't move. And Angela admitted to smearing dog feces on Jeanette's face. She would also make Jeanette stand against the wall with her arms up in the air for hours at a time, which patients referred to as the torture position. Jeanette never once received medical attention for her injuries, so her mouth just became severely deformed from the repeated beatings. Her lips were torn apart on a regular basis. When police first interviewed Angela, she tried her best to convince police that her injuries were the result of the fall in the living room. But police didn't buy it, obviously. The scar tissue and infections were so old, so it just didn't make sense. They continued to question her about Jeanette's body and her wounds, and eventually Angela would say that Richard was the person who disciplined the children, and she never hurt her daughter, and she had no part of it. When police questioned Angela about why Jeanette was so emaciated, Angela simply said that Jeanette had split her lip a while back, and Angela didn't really know how to feed her, and she couldn't put food in her mouth very well, so she just lost weight. Angela did finally broke down sobbing, saying, "I did wrong. I never should have spanked my daughter with a belt." And she apologized a lot, saying that she was sorry and she knew what she did was wrong. And she was apparently sobbing throughout the entire trial as well. And I don't know if that's because she truly was sorry. She was probably just sorry she got caught, and now the world was hearing the truth about how awful she was. Angela was charged with murder and given the death penalty. The first female ever to be handed the death penalty in the state of Oregon. And Richard was also charged with first-degree murder and given a life sentence without parole. Richard had remained fairly silent throughout his trial as the focus was mostly on Angela. He claims that he didn't want to make a statement until the verdict was handed out. He did finally talk to media from prison. He claimed that he had never been in a serious relationship before meeting Angela and feels like he married the devil. No kidding. Apparently, she wasn't always mean, and he fell in love with her and her children, thinking they'd have a happy marriage. He was also a truck driver through most of their relationship, and he claims that being on the road was the main reason he didn't know about the majority of abuse, and he was just naive and believed whatever Angela told him. And the times he did insist on medical intervention, like one time when Angela hit Jeanette's face so hard, her already torn lip almost fell off. He claims Angela would threaten to blame the injuries on him, or she would leave him and take his only son, so he was scared. Angela would just apply bandages or sew her lip up and take care of it herself. He also claims that he never went into the girls' bedrooms. He said that he didn't really want to go into the teenage girls' bedrooms, that they weren't biologically his, and he was uncomfortable with that. So he never saw the blood-splattered walls. In fact, he mostly stayed on the couch after having a major heart attack in the summer of 2009. It wasn't until days before Jeanette's death that Jeanette herself took him into her room. It was referred to as the beating room, and she showed him her whip marks that were infected to the bone, yet he still didn't seek help. He claims he never participated in the beatings, but Patience, the other daughter, testified that he did, that he would hit Jeanette in the face with his hand or throw shoes at her if she failed to maintain the torture position. Now, he might have been scared of Angela or scared of losing his son if he came forward, but you can't live in a house with someone who has been tortured and looks like the walking death and think that nothing is wrong. The fact that he did participate in hitting her and that he never once got her help absolutely means that he is responsible in Jeanette's death. Thankfully, in the end, he was also given a life sentence. After many appeals, Angela's sentence has been reduced from death to life in prison. And I mean, I guess that's fine. I don't personally really believe in the death penalty, but as long as she never sees the light of day and gets released from jail, she can suffer in the walls of prison. This whole case is just so heartbreaking. Angela's past really doesn't excuse what happened to Jeanette, but it's just a reminder that childhood abuse really does affect people for the rest of their lives. And I don't know why CPS didn't take this case more serious. If you ever suspect that someone is being abused, don't stop at just one phone call. Do everything in your power to help that person. And I know foster care isn't always better, but in a case like this, it definitely would have been. And there are good foster families out there too. Thanks again for joining me here at Felony Spectator, and I hope you like my videos. If you do, please hit subscribe so you don't miss another one. Thank you.